Oh, wait! That's it!
What?
Silly me! I forgot the acid!
Ah, acids, the favored weapon of any supervillain who's worth his salt. But what is an acid? Why does it eat away at other types of substances when you add an acid to something? And what's a base? You guys maybe have heard of acids and bases. What's this pH scale that people keep talking about? And why is water considered neutral? Hopefully by the end of today's video, you'll have the answers to all of these questions. To get started, we need to just look at a single molecule of water. So we have our oxygen, we have our hydrogens, and you all know that this is a polar covalent bond, which means that the oxygen is pulling on those electrons a little bit harder than the hydrogens are. And one consequence of this is that periodically, the oxygen can swipe the electron altogether, creating an ion, a molecular ion called hydroxide. And we still have the hydrogen, but now it's been stripped of its electron, so it's really just a proton floating around. Now, periodically, what's going to happen is we're going to get that proton attaching to another water molecule, which would give us H3O+. Now, in a normal glass of water, a neutral glass of water, it's just pure water, we are going to have a situation where there's an equal number of hydroxide ions and hydronium ions, which is what this one is. And if that's the case, they will combine together, the charges will equal out, the atoms will rearrange, and you'll get two H2O molecules. So this is what we mean when we say water is neutral. They have an equal proportion of these two ions in solution. But some materials add extra protons into solution, which creates a higher proportion of these hydronium ions. So for example, if I add hydrochloric acid to water, just like the oxygen steals the electron from hydrogen, the chlorine will steal the electron from hydrogen. So you'll get a lot of H3O+ molecules and chlorine minus molecules, but without the necessary increase in the number of OH negatives. So that means that we have a higher proportion of hydronium ions, and that's what we call an acid. An acid is a material that donates protons to the solution. It adds more hydrogen ions into the solution. A base is the opposite. If I take NaOH, sodium hydroxide, notice sodium, Na, hydroxide, the same ion that we had here, so sodium hydroxide, and we add it into a normal aqueous solution, a normal water solution. Then what we're going to have is this OH negative comes off, so you end up with sodium plus, as well as H2O and OH negative. So this is what we call a base. Anything that creates more hydroxide ions is going to be a base. Now, what happens if I add an acid and a base together? If I add an acid and a base together, so NaOH plus HCl, the OH here and the H here, they're going to combine together, and we're going to get H2O. So they'll create water, and we call that neutralization. We have an equal number of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions, so they're going to form water plus NaCl, right? Na plus Cl minus, this is going to create an ionic bond, which is going to give us salt. So the byproduct of adding sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid together is salt water. Now we still want the ability to describe how acidy or how basic a particular material is. So in order to do that, what we do is we indicate how common the hydronium ions would be in that solution. In pure water, we would find one H3O molecule for every 10 million water molecules, or 1 mole of H3O for every 10 million mole water, but this is not a chemistry class and I'm not bothering teaching you guys about molar mass or anything like that. So 1 in 10 million. Now, in an acid, with HCl in the mix, we would actually find maybe something more like 1 in 100. Whereas with a base, we would find something more like 1 in 100 billion. So it's going to be very, very, very rare. Now you might imagine that this is a whole lot of writing to do every time you want to indicate how powerful of an acid or a base something is. So instead, what we use are log units. Another way to write 1 divided by 10 million is 1 times 10 to the negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 zeros to the negative 7. Another way to write 1 in 100 is 1 times 10 to the negative 2. And another way to write 1 in 100 billion is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1 times 10 to the negative 11th. So it's a little bit easier to write in scientific notation, but this is still a little bit annoying. So instead of having these concentration, what we do is we convert it to pH. And the pH is equal to the negative log of the hydronium ion concentration. So here's our hydronium ion concentration, and the log is really just looking at this unit up here, this number here. So the log of 1 times 10 to the negative 7th is negative 7, and pH is the negative log, then the pH is 7. See that? Here, now that you saw that, you should be able to understand this one pretty fast. 1 times 10 to the negative 2, the pH would be 2. 1 times 10 to the negative 11, the pH would be 11. So, this is neutral, 7. This is acidic. Anything that is lower than 7 is acidic. And this is basic. Anything higher than 7 is considered basic. Now, I imagine right about now this information is seeming fairly scary, and chemistry always seems that way when you get lost in the equations, but we can simplify it quite a bit. A chemical compound that releases hydrogen ions into solution is an acid. So the HCl we just looked at, that was an acid because it increased the number of free hydrogen ions floating around in that solution. A compound that accepts hydrogen ions, protons, and removes it from solution is a base. So earlier when we looked at sodium hydroxide, the extra hydroxide ions would interact with this hydrogen proton and it would form water. They would neutralize each other. So sodium hydroxide was acting as a base because it could remove those protons from solution. To describe the acidity of a solution, we use a scale called the pH scale, and anything that has a lot of hydrogen ions is an acid, and a lot of OH negative ions would be a base. So here we have 3 glasses of water. The one in the center has an equal proportion of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions, so that is neutral. The one on the left has an abundance of OH negative hydroxide ions, so that is a base, and the one on the right has an abundance of hydrogen ions, so that is an acid. The other thing that you want to know about the pH scale is that it is logarithmic. So a substance with a pH of 5 is 10 times as acidic as a substance with a pH of 6. A substance with a pH of 3 is 10, 100, 1,000 times more powerful than a substance with a pH of 6. And it goes the same on the other side of the scale. So if we take a look at, for example, household bleach with a pH somewhere between 12 and 13, we'll call it 12 just for convenience here, that is going to be 100 times more basic than, say, milk of magnesia, which is in and around 10. So here you can get a good idea of what types of common substances you might interact with and what their ranking is on the pH scale. Oven cleaner has a really high pH, so it's super basic, up around 14, and then lemon juice and your stomach acid are obviously acids, and they have a very, very low pH. So the lower the pH, the more hydrogen ions there are. Now, why is this important for biology? Well, what you're going to learn coming up very, very soon is that every important task inside your cells is carried out by what we call proteins. And proteins are large, complicated biological molecules that are actually held together by hydrogen bonding. They have to fold themselves into the correct shape. They're kind of origami molecules. That's how I like to think of them. And the thing that holds those folding patterns together are hydrogen bonds. But if you have lots and lots of free ions floating around, lots of acid or very, very basic conditions, that's going to mess up all of the hydrogen bonding that you have between different parts of this protein, so it'll end up losing its shape. And as we talked about in the Criteria of Life video, shape indicates function. There's a complementarity of structure and function. So if a protein loses its shape, it also can no longer do its job. And since proteins do everything inside of your cells, that becomes a really, really big problem. So returning to the question that was posed at the very beginning of the video, we now know what an acid is and what a base is and what we mean when we say it's neutral and how the pH scale works. But why do acids eat away at things? Well, the answer is essentially that chemicals want to react with these ions. So if you have a really high concentration of ions, it's going to disrupt the chemical bonds that you find in other types of material. And some things are going to be more sensitive to it than others are, which is why acids react very, very vigorously. But bases also react very, very vigorously. So you can get a chemical burn from touching something that's too basic, just like you can get a burn from touching something that's too acidic.